Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I call the June 9th Council Study Session to order. This is Barb DeMichelle, Council Member, and I will be the chair of tonight's meeting. Before we move on to tonight's agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. On March the 6th, the mayor issued an emergency proclamation declaring a civil emergency in the city due to the COVID-19 outbreak. On March 24th, the governor issued Proclamation 20-28, prohibiting meetings that fall under the Open Public Meetings Act. The proclamation has been extended through June the 17th. Tonight's meeting will be held entirely remotely. The meeting will be recorded, streamed live, and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so everyone can follow along. Typically, we take public comments after each agenda item at study sessions. We have two items on tonight's agenda. ID 0640-2020, Programmatic Analysis and 2021 Budget Updates, and ID 0698, Business Recovery Plan. However, due to the additional logistics of the virtual meeting, we will be taking all comments at the beginning of the meeting. Council President Hunt will also share a summary of any comments that have been emailed regarding tonight's agenda items. I will now take a roll call of the council members in attendance. Please say here when I call your name. I am here. Councilmember Goodman.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Council President.
Here.
Here. Councilmember Martz.
Here.
Deputy Council President Ray.
Here.
And Councilmember Walsh.
Here.
Thank you. In addition, the following city staff are participating in tonight's meeting: City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz, Finance Director Beth Goldberg, and Economic Development Manager Jen Davis-Hayes. We have other city staff who are also in attendance and on hand for questions. For those members of the public on the call, welcome. If you signed up to speak, the clerk or I will call on you to make comments when we reach that portion of the agenda. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. Please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And if you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. For council members, please continue to use the chat to indicate when you wish to speak, and identify yourself before you ask a question or participate in debate. The first item on the agenda is public comment. And clerk, do we have anyone signed up to speak this evening?
Yes, Kathy McQuarrie has signed up to speak.
Thank you. Because Kathy has spoken many times before to us, I'm going to give an abbreviated version of our guidelines for speaking. Please direct the comments to the whole council and not individuals. And while this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, unmute your microphone, state your name, address, and relationship to the city, speak clearly and pause frequently, limit comments to 5 minutes, and then remute your microphone when you are done. Kathy, would you like to proceed with your comments?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to speak this evening at your City Council work session. Because I'm also participating in part of the presentation with Jen and her team under Economic Development, I thought I'd take an opportunity at this point in time to make sure that I'm sharing chamber comments. Again, I'm Kathy McQuarrie. I'm the CEO at the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce. Just a few updates. We wanted to remind City Council and those listening that there is still $130 million left in the PPP program. And so if you know of anyone still looking or interested, having heard the rollbacks and changes to PPP program, we'd be happy to discuss those options with them. Also, the Chamber is going to be opposing something that's come up recently from ESD, and we're hoping maybe City Council and the Mayor's Office might look into doing the same. We've received notification that ESD will not be able to support a tax holiday or postponement of tax payments, and is predicting employers are going to see a large tax increase to replenish the funds due to a lot of the fraudulent activity that has gone on with unemployment claims. The fraud and unemployment fund stability problems existed before COVID-19 and should have been corrected much sooner, in our opinion. The COVID-19 crisis did not create the problem, and is the Unemployment Security Department systems that just made them worse. The Coalition of Chambers and AWB have already made similar statements regarding the tax increases that ESD is recommending. Having said that, I just want to go into the Chamber's position on some of the items you'll be working on this evening. One of them comes from a meeting a few weeks back when it came to our attention that there were some community needs for PPE and a co-op. So the Chamber has created several commercial accounts with several distributors and is now ready to roll out a cooperative PPE purchasing program with the business community. We also found out the other day regarding PPE that King County has ordered something like 10 million masks to be distributed to every employee in the state, and the chambers have stepped up to be that delivery tool. So within the next 2 weeks, we will be receiving 70,000 masks and an unknown at this time number of hand sanitizers to distribute to the business community. With our vision partners' help and help of some volunteer organizations we've already reached out to, we will be creating drive-through pickups for those masks and hand sanitizers. We want to let you know that we are very much in favor of the CARES Act funding that you're looking at today, and we'll be continuing to do research on regarding grants for small businesses. To the extent that the Chamber and our Chamber Foundation has offered to help, including any sort of volunteering to go over applications to completely managing the grant application process under your supervision. We have also come up with a safety pledge we're going to be sending out to the community, and basically it's just a small pledge for businesses to place on their windows and doorways that basically let the business community know that they are putting safety first as they're returning to reopening their stores, and they pledge a little safety pledge, and you'll be hearing more about that within the next few days. We support all the Shop Local programs you're going to be discussing tonight. Especially excited about the extending of the outdoor seating areas, just with a little bit of edge of caution, because we've already heard of one business in another neighborhood being quite heavily fined. We need to make sure that those restaurants have a clear message from all of us that they are still required to resubmit their new maps with the Washington State Alcohol and Cannabis Board. So that's very, very important that as we move through this process and we create more outdoor dining, that we also partner with the Alcohol Beverage Control Board. We also wanted to say we are rolling out a few of our own shop local programs. We're big believers in shopping local, and as you've seen in the past with our shop local program at around the holidays and Epicurean experience that we do in the spring, we will be doing more of that sort of thing with one coming up this summer that's searching for salmon. And we already have 50 local businesses from all over the city signed up to participate in that. And lastly, just a couple of things from our Economic Development Committee, and that is we've been hearing a lot of talk about subleasing. And so some new opportunities coming back now that we're reopening and are post-COVID, that businesses that have leases are looking to maybe sublease their spaces. And so there might be an opportunity and a way for both the city and the chamber to help with that messaging and find out who those businesses are and connect those looking for smaller spaces with those that have spaces that might be a little bit too large at this point in time. And we will be implementing a program called Local Intel, and Jen can tell you more about that as time progresses, because I'm sure I've used up my allotment of time. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this evening.
Just a reminder to everyone else on the call that comments can be submitted at any time by email to citycouncil@issaquah.gov. All right, so I think we are ready now to go to our first item. Councilmember Hunt, would you like to do public comment on this item first, or would you prefer to wait until after the presentation? Council President Hunt, sorry.
I can, this is Council President Hunt. I can give the summary of comments. I think it would probably follow, I think it's best to have it follow the presentation though.
All right, thank you. So we'll go ahead with the presentation from the staff, and this will be presented by City Administrator Wally Bobkowitz and Beth Goldberg, our Finance Director.
Yes, Councilmember DiMichele.
Uh-oh.
We're having sound issues. If we can have Wally, the City Administrator.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. We have several items to walk through this evening regarding the 2021 budget process, as well as work that we're doing with the city services assessment. I'm going to ask Beth Goldberg, our Finance Director, to start us off, and I'll pick up toward the end. Beth, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Tisha, could you put the presentation up, please? Okay, so as Council Member DiMichele and City Administrator Bobkowitz indicated, we're here tonight to provide an update on some of the programmatic and analytic work we're doing, as well as a budget process overview. Tisha, if you could move to the next slide, please. So the specific items that we're going to cover tonight are an update on the city-wide service assessment, the 2021 budget calendar, and a discussion about performance measurement. There will be time throughout the discussion, throughout the presentation, for council to engage in discussion, and we certainly would welcome any direction or feedback that you have about what we're discussing. As a reminder, a lot of the discussions about this started during the City Council retreat back in February, which feels like many lifetimes ago. And at that meeting, we got some direction on the citywide service assessment and what council's vision is for the 2021 budget, particularly as it relates to integrating it with the strategic plan and performance measurement. So we're going to give you an update tonight on where we are with all of these items. If we can move to the next slide, please. So in terms of the citywide service assessment, when we were last before the council at the City Council retreat, we had talked about looking at a merger of our Public Works Operations and Public Works Engineering Department into a single department. Work on that continues. It's slowed, the pace has slowed a little bit related to as we've been responding to COVID, but work on that continues. We also talked about looking at the structure of our Development Services Department. Again, work on that continues. And we will be returning to the City Council later in July with an update on that. In addition, we added some items subsequent to the City Council retreat, understanding that Council had a desire to really kind of look under the hood of how we're providing various services to make sure that we were providing them in an efficient, cost-effective manner. So that work has included an evaluation of our development services fees to ensure cost recovery. And again, with the development services report coming back on July 23rd, we will provide an update for Council on this work at that time, and are hoping if there are any changes to the fees that we would integrate that in the 2021 budget. In addition, we also added a review of our jail services work as well as the contracts, and we will be bringing that work as well as work that we're doing to review the provision of our court services and our court contracts at the end of July. I believe the date for that is July 28th. So a lot more is coming to the Council, and for many of these items, our goal is to have the work completed, get direction from Council so that we can integrate any changes into the 2021 budget. So if we can move to the next slide, please, although maybe I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Sorry. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. Just a quick one. In our packet, it shows the DSD Development Services Cost Recovery meeting on June 23rd. Is that correct? I think you mentioned July.
That might be it. Well, actually, have I got my dates wrong? I may have my dates wrong. There's so much going on. I think that is June 23rd. Sorry, there are a lot of dates floating around in my head. So thank you for clarifying.
I see that from the packet. Thank you.
And Beth, I don't see any other questions at this time.
Okay, great. If we could move to the next slide, please. So now, for all the dates floating around in our head, this is a perfect segue into this slide. So what we've laid out here, and there's far more information about this in your packet, is upcoming key dates related to the budget process, namely when we are going to be interfacing with the City Council on various report backs or looking for direction from Council. And so I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on this, but just want to highlight a couple of changes from last year. First of all, City Administrator Bobkowitz will talk about this in his comments later during this presentation, but we do have 2 workshops set aside to work with the City Council on performance measurement. We had made a commitment at the City Council retreat that we were going to be working to align the presentation of the 2021 budget with our strategic plan, and work on that is underway. It ties in with the work that Finance is doing on Munis re-implementation. Susie Monsell, who you all know very well, is currently working with the departments to do the crosswalk or the roadmap of our current budget to the new chart of accounts, which is a necessary first step to being able to present the budget along the lines of strategic plans. The work on that is underway. In terms of other key dates on here, new this year, we've got 2 community engagement sessions set aside, one September 2nd, where we will present the financial forecast that you will hear from us on August 11th, and then a second community engagement meeting on October 7th, where we will be providing an overview of the budget, again, similar to what we will be providing the council on October 7th, or I'm sorry, on October 6th. Other key dates, financial forecast is coming on August 11th. That is going to be a unique challenge this year because of the current economic climate, but we will be updating both 2020 and our 2021 outlook during that presentation. And then the two dates in bold are September 29th, when the mayor will transmit her proposed budget to the city council, and then November 16th, which is when we've got slated for the council to adopt the budget. Within that, we've got time to do a budget overview as well as time for budget deliberation. So that should feel similar to last year's process. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions.
Yes, Councilmember Goodman has a question.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. It's a question, I guess, comment. You can tell by my question that it's a comment. It doesn't look like we have any additional dates identified yet in case we need extra time. And so that's sort of a question. Then my comment would be, we've got a lot, we're going to have a lot of things to talk about during this budget. And so my suggestion would be to the mayor's office and council leadership is that we get a couple of dates locked down. Otherwise, if we get into October and we realize we may need some more time for whatever reason, we're going to have trouble finding dates. That was my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've talked about some backup dates and we've mapped those in. We didn't put them on here, but we have talked internally about what would be those backup times if we need more time to discuss what is in the budget. As you know, there are a lot of meetings on here, but we have set aside some additional time, and a lot of it is going to depend on the financial forecast. Depending on what the revenue picture is, the work we've done already this year to address the financial situation, because these were all partial year savings. If the revenue picture if there's improvement in that, a lot of the details may already be in place. We won't know that, of course, but that is one possibility of how this plays out.
Great,
Okay.
thank you.
Sorry. Beth, we have two more questions. The first from Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Chair DeMichelle. This is Zach Hall. Apologies in advance. I should have just emailed this question prior to the meeting, but can you kind of go into depth a little bit about what community engagement means through the lens of budget development and how that looks?
Councilmember Hall, members of the council, let me give that a try. In my previous roles in other communities, I have found that it's very important to get community feedback prior to the budget being presented to the council, and then after it is presented to get feedback once it's out there. So the September 2nd community engagement, as Beth has indicated, will start with the overview forecast, but then just get input. Really open it up to talk about whatever issues people feel strongly about. And in my past experience, that then informs the final discussions before the proposed budget's presented to the council. On the second piece, the date for October 7th, it'll be right after Mayor Pauly presents the budget to the council. This will give the community an opportunity to dive deeper into what the budget has. People will have had it for a week or so once it is transmitted on September 29th. So usually it's good to give people an opportunity to do that. So assuming we're able to have in-person meetings again, it would be an in-person meeting, and we would get feedback and provide information.
Thank you. You have a follow-up question, Councilmember Hall?
No, thank you, Chair DeMichelle. That was great, City Administrator Bobquist. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Ray.
Hi, this is Chris Ray. I have the follow-up for Councilmember Hall. City Administrator Bobkowitz, what do you envision that the format of these community engagements might look like?
In past experience, you go through a slide deck of information and then open it up for questions, and it's a dialogue. Maybe it's important to say would not be envisioned as a council meeting. That this would be a staff, a driven staff conducted meeting. So really an opportunity for people to ask questions, to put up information, have directors present to answer more detailed questions. So there's a lot of give and take, a lot of dialogue that usually occurs.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up, if I might. I mean, I know this is unfair, particularly since we don't know if we'll be in person, but have you thought about what the venue would be for such a meeting as this?
I'll be honest, I haven't, not knowing what the circumstances would be. Generally speaking, try non-traditional venues to try to go closer to where people might be. Certainly, if the council's interested, we could look at other opportunities for engagement as well. I've run the gamut of going to restaurants and breweries to have budget meetings, to being out in front of public places on the weekend to talk about budget. We weren't really anticipating any of that with this first foray, but certainly would want to try to do something other than the council chamber at 7 o'clock. And I think, again, we'll just have to wait and see what the world looks like as we get closer.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh, and I have the follow-up to Councilmember Ray's question. First of all, I have a little bit of concern for the meeting being September 2nd, since that is right before school goes back into session, supposedly, September 4th. And so that's typically a time when people are out of town. So I have just slight concern with that date range. But then also, one of the things our Parks Department did, I'm not great with dates, but a year or so ago in looking at the parks budget, was do an online scenario where people were given $100 that they could spend and distribute to different areas. And I thought that was a very valuable experience. And that's something that doesn't necessarily have to wait until September. It's something that we could put online using the tools that we have. And so my question is, have we considered any other forms of online engagement to generate input rather than just a meeting?
We haven't. We certainly can. We also struggled with timing, looking at the various weeks. We really wanted it to be no sooner than a month out from the budget, because certainly if we hear, based on what we hear from the community, we want that to have an opportunity to inform the final preparation of the budget. And so given that it's at the end of September, we looked at August. I think if the council feels we can go a week earlier, at that last week of August, we'd be happy to do that. This is a very strange year. Normally August is a difficult time to have any kind of public meeting. So we're really looking, part of tonight is really get your feedback. So, we can look at the online tools. There are several out there that range from very simple and straightforward to pretty complex. And I would think we could look more for the more straightforward versions. Again, that would be asking folks to engage in that late August, early September timeframe. So, Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, perhaps at the end of the presentation, before we move off the item, if we could get some more direction from the council about what your thoughts are. I think we have some time to craft a few different things if you'd like us to.
Great, thank you. Beth, I'm not seeing any additional questions. If you want to proceed.
Yeah, actually, this is a good segue because Wally's got the next slide. So, so maybe that's it. I will bow out and he can pick it up from here.
Wonderful. Go ahead.
So as we have been working over the last few weeks on the schedule and in talking with members of the council, we wanted to pick back up the discussion regarding performance measurement. It had been our hope to spend a little bit more time this spring staging this, given the nature of what we suspect the 2021 budget to look like. The integration of performance measurement starting for 2021 is probably not as likely as it might have been 6 months ago. So what we would still like to do is have a dialogue with the council prior to the budget being submitted so that we can come up with at least some frameworks of performance measurement, have some initial performance measures in place aligned with the city council's goals, and have those travel with the budget, and then spend more time during 2021 refining that. As we think even longer term, Beth talked a little bit about the realignment of the chart of accounts. That will be done in a way that will support performance measurement by capturing budgets by goal area. I think really this needs to be a longer term project. We look at 2 years from now being able to hopefully do a 2-year budget for the first time, certainly in the recent past in the city of Issaquah. So I would think that a fully integrated performance measurement system would be in place for that. But at the same time, I don't want to wait, and I know that many of you don't want to wait. So our hope is that on July 14th, we could have a discussion about what we think may make sense, areas to focus on, each of the goal areas, get your feedback at that meeting on July 14th, and then come back on September 9th with some proposed specifics for that. Again, we've tried to be realistic. I think we need to balance the unknowns given the specific circumstances that we're currently facing. Also want to be sensitive to the work that our finance staff is doing on Munis. A well-executed and well-implemented Munis system will make performance measurement over the longer term much easier. And so we want to be mindful to have the resources available for that. So that is our current thinking with performance measurement. And we think that the timing, giving everything else on the council's calendar makes sense. So unless there are questions, Councilmember DiMichele, and I think there may be one on this topic.
Yes, Councilmember Walsh.
Actually, I think I'm going to hold off until the end. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And then Tisha, the final slide. So that wraps up what our plan presentation was for. We had wanted the council to have as much time this evening to discuss the proposed strategies for the budget. We've also included in your packet 3 additional documents which you may wish to speak to. First is the latest revision of our month-to-month fiscal 2020 budget analysis. We have some additional data since the last time we brought that to the council, and so we are certainly prepared to answer any specific questions that you have. Needless to say, we still don't have a lot of information from the spring to inform any kind of decision-making or analysis. And we're happy to talk to any of the specifics. We've also promised and have included a new revision of the city work plan with some additional updates on projects included there. And then finally, we've included for the first time a comprehensive citywide capital improvement project list. As we talked at the retreat in February, the idea to take a document that had been used by the Recreation and Community Services Department and to make that include all of the CIP projects we've accomplished. And so that document is also prepared and is included as well. So Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, we appreciate this opportunity to talk in broad terms about where we are, the process that we are outlining moving forward, and are looking to get whatever additional feedback you have on the process, as well as answer any specific questions you have about any of the attached information. Thank you.
Great. And I think I'd like to proceed and take any more questions that people may have, and then hear a summary of our email communications that have come in from Council President Hunt, and then go to comments, if that's okay, Councilmember Walsh. Does anybody else have a question for either Beth or Wally? All right, Councilor Walsh.
Thank you. This time on the question side. Beth, I know that you had included was the general fund monthly results. That's a lot of numbers. And I know that you had given us initially your best guesstimate that it was going to be about a 20% deficit in what we were going to see. And I believe I'm still seeing that 20%. So can you just give a sense, and I don't know if you can bring that up on the screen at all, but a sense of what maybe you are seeing from data and what has changed there?
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. In some respects, there's some clarity, and in many respects, there's also not a lot of clarity, but I can give you a high level of what I'm seeing with the revenue trends. First, sales tax, which is what we talk about a lot because it's our biggest revenue source. And what the report that we've been presenting to you doesn't show you is how it compares with last March. So in comparison to last March, our March was 23% off of the previous March. You might recall that the forecast, I had it down 30%. So we're trending, I hate to say 23% is a good number. It's not in this case, but compared to 23%, it's a little bit better. The other thing, and I had a period of mourning about this, we had a phenomenally strong February. We presented the forecast on April 6th. We got February data at the end of April. Our February results were 16% higher than last February. January was, for the year, January and February together, we were trending about 12.5% higher. The sales tax was performing phenomenally well. 2018 was a record high year. We were trending for those 2 months 5.2% above 2018. So I had a couple of days of mourning what could have been, but alas, it's not. But the strength in January and February combined with March not being quite as bad as forecast certainly bode well and it suggests potentially some optimism there. Property tax is about on par with what I had forecast. I think when looking at the numbers, I think it was suggesting maybe 11% down. I was forecasting 10%. So property tax may be performing a little bit worse, but we're also expecting some lags in property tax because the county granted extensions on people paying their property tax. So property tax basically online. B&O tax compared to last year at this time is down about 15%. Again, for that one, like sales tax forecasted that to drop 30%. But that's of the 4 big revenues, that's the one that I'm least comfortable coming to conclusions on because it's first quarter. So it would have included January, February, March. So really only 1 month of the COVID experience. What will be more telling is what's happening April, May, June, but those payments aren't going to be due till the end of July. So we're barely going to have that data in time for the August forecast that we present to you. So that one, that's the wild card in this. Utility tax is performing better than anticipated. Some of that is at the end of last year, Puget Sound Energy announced a double-digit % rate increase on natural gas, and that's trending up. So that might be saving our bacon on utility tax. Have not looked at the other revenue lines. So for example, parks, the closures have persisted a little bit longer than what we anticipated. So we're likely going to see some additional weakness in parks revenues beyond what was going to be forecast. So all of this is a long answer to say the results that we've received so far don't have me feeling nervous that things are going to be dramatically worse than what we anticipated, and potentially maybe a little bit of optimism that maybe it's not going to be as bad, but we need a few more data points to really understand and put a pulse on what's going on there. I should also add REIT is another revenue that we've talked about in the past. We don't have anything in your packet on that, but the April data was off 57% relative to last year. But there's a lot of confusing data out there about what's really happening with the real estate market. You know, you're seeing sales pick up. So that's another wild card that we'll be watching closely as we get more data coming in.
Thank you, Beth.
Are there any other questions for staff from council members? All right, I'm not seeing any. So Council President Hunt, do you want to summarize the email communications we've received?
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. So we received a number of emails regarding the work plan in addition to the budget. We received several emails specifically regarding the dog park item on our work plan and about the delay and reduction in funding for the dog park. We also received an email with concern about in the context of budgeting, but about concern about low-income renters and what's being done for low-income renters. And we received an email with broad support for using more metrics in our budgeting, performance measures in our budgeting, and specifically using those metrics to align our budget with our strategic plan. And then we have also recently received a number of emails regarding the budget and regarding reallocating funds from police to community services, and broadly regarding the need for more funding for community services and community-based organizations. That concludes my summary of the email correspondence that we've received.
Thank you. So we'll now go to council comments, and just a reminder that the administration is seeking feedback on whether or not we buy into the calendar schedule that they presented, and then any other comments that you want to provide. So I'm going to go back to Councilmember Walsh, who had asked to comment earlier, and then if other council members want to put their willingness to speak in the chat, I will try to take them in order. So Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. A previous version of myself from January or February would cringe at me saying this, but I actually think we have more important things coming into our budget conversation than performance measurements and metrics. I think that in the given circumstances that our world is in, both with a pandemic and conversations about how we should be spending our money related to police and community services, that I would prefer, if needed, shifting the conversation this year away from performance metrics and more into conversations of where our community wants to be spending that money. And then also just this sense of, hey, we really wanted to do this community services assessment based on the previous year's budget when we fell short. And I'm seeing some of that here, but I'm also seeing that the community services assessment is, the first two bullet points on the list were very much about DSD and development services and public works, that consolidation, which I think is great. But I think that's something that Wally, as our city administrator coming in, wanted to do anyway. And so I don't want to give ourselves too much credit in saying that's a huge part of the citywide services assessment when what I think council really wanted to do was find areas where we can find savings and adjust our budgeting toward our community values. And so the point that I'm coming back to in looking at this calendar is I would like to see more community engagement that isn't from a narrow scope of what do you think about our financial forecast and what do you think about the budget that the mayor has proposed, but more of a are we meeting your needs and does our budget reflect our community values? So I would like to see that. And if anything has to go from this calendar, as much as, again, previous me would cringe at saying it, I think performance metrics is probably the one that I would advocate shifting off to a future year, especially given that Munis reimplementation is going to provide better opportunity to create those metrics. And I do have some slight concerns that anything that we create this year will just have to be redone in the following year when the new system is in place. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Martz?
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. And I've been having network problems, so hopefully I'll be able to be heard. Two comments. The first is I would like to respectfully disagree with Councilmember Walsh. I think that performance metrics, there's never a good time to do performance metrics. There will always be things that are important that need to occur. But we have been trying to build performance metrics in this city for over a decade. And it's never the right time, and it's always partial, and Munis implementation has been going on forever, and who knows how much longer it will take. We are not being wise stewards of the public's money until we have performance metrics to measure the performance of our organization versus goals that it sets for itself ahead of time. And so I do not want to delay this. We have a lot on our plate this year, but this is governance 101, and it has been delayed far too long, and I refuse to see it delayed further, even as we have other important issues in front of us. This is, as I said, it's been a decade coming. It's gone far too long. Secondly, I want to plus one the earlier comments about building in reserve dates. I think that there's a lot on our plate, and when you add even more community engagement, I want to see some reserve dates. If we don't need them, great. Wonderful to give those dates back, but we all have very busy schedules, and I want to give these issues the time that they require. Thank you.
Thank you. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I also want to respectfully disagree with Councilmember Walsh on the importance of performance metrics. I think that if done correctly, this could be a very important way in which we address the challenges that we are facing right now as a city and that neighboring cities are facing. But I think that having a discussion about a framework that is performance metric based and how we can align our budget with our strategic plan in a way that's much more transparent, I think that's really important right now, and maybe even more so important right now when we do have this financial impacts of a pandemic. And I think that we might not be able to finish the entire framework or implement it. I think we need to take steps this year, and then I think we can refine the framework in future iterations. I think that's part of the plan, but I do think we need to take a big step towards that this year. I also think we have community right now that is interested in looking at our budget and looking at how our budget could better align with community values. And so having a more transparent way for people to interact with the budget and see what we're using to measure performance, I think that would be a really important engagement tool and will make the budget more accessible. And I also really want to support the idea of having those community engagement meetings and also have other options for people to provide more comments. The Councilmember Walsh earlier proposed something like what's been done with the Parks Department with if you had $100, how would you allocate it? I think that those sorts of options would be great so that we have more voices in the budget conversation. And again, I think right now with the community interested in participating in that conversation, we definitely have an opportunity to have more voices. And I think that is really important. And then let's see. I think that I do have a question about Munis. So I would think that if we begin the process of setting up a framework with Munis for performance metrics, is there any issue around having to redo that or any sort of redundancy that would occur with that? I guess this is a question for City Administrator Bob Quitz.
Council President, I don't believe so. Finance Director Goldberg is still on the line. Perhaps you could talk just briefly, Beth, about the chart of accounts and the importance of that process, sort of laying a groundwork.
Yeah, I would be happy to speak to that. So Munis is an important foundational step because we need to update the chart of accounts in order to be able to align the budget to the strategic plan. And the current version of Munis is not robust enough to accommodate the current chart of accounts and the level of detail we will need to align the budget with the council's strategic plan priorities. So that's a foundational issue. Munis is not the vehicle to track performance measure. And in fact, if we are going to have a robust performance measurement program, we need some platform through which to track them. That's not Munis. So Munis is the foundation upon which all of this is built. We've got to get that right. But then as we're building out a performance measurement program, you can do something where you're monitoring things on the side, but if you really want a robust system, we are going to need something in place to track those measures. And so that's, I just want to make it clear that Munis is not that platform.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And then, so that's my broad comments, is that I am supportive of the priority or of the performance-based metrics. I think it will make for better community engagement and more transparency. And I also, as a separate comment, we did receive public comments on the parks planning and the parks work plan items. And I think at this time where people are really looking to our parks for recreation and for the mental health and physical health benefits that they provide, as we see these parks projects being delayed, I would just really like to stress that I think parks are providing a really important community service right now. And so if we can make sure that we are providing places for people to get exercise, fresh air, I think that's very important. It's always an important part of Issaquah's identity, but it's very important right now. And so that's my comments on the parks items that are being delayed.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councilmember Goodman next, and then Director Watling to speak to the parks issues. So Councilmember Goodman.
I would like to allow Director Watling to go first, please. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Jeff? And I don't, there you are. Okay. Jeff, can you speak to the parks issue? Oops. Wally?
Let me see if I can unmute Jeff and see if he's on the line.
Okay.
Jeff, are you present? Mr. Watling? It
Yes.
looks like, oh, thank
I am.
you.
There he is.
I am present. I apologize. I've had Wi-Fi issues like Councilmember March, so I also called on my phone. So, Jeff Watling, Parks and Community Services Director. Yeah, I think to the parks issues in general, and maybe specifically to the dog park, as we had to make really hard delay decisions due to not only budget impacts, but staffing impacts and reductions. The projects do remain a priority to us and the mayor's office. And so speaking specific to the dog park, for example, though the loss of some budget, also the loss of a park planner and the frozen park operations positions don't allow us to necessarily proceed as we planned. We still want to explore options and see how we might be able to proceed in some manner, evaluate those, report back to you, have some public engagement around it. Those options could involve perhaps a temporary or interim dog park. So we're going to continue to explore creative ways to accomplish.
Uh-oh. Jeff, we lost you.
So, Council Member DiMichele, let me just finish his sentence.
Okay.
And that is that we do want to look for some alternative measures, especially for the dog park. In speaking with Mayor Pauly today, she has asked her staff to try to figure something out on a temporary basis and try to implement that as quickly as possible. So Jeff and I will be working with our staffs over the next few weeks to identify a way to do that. So. We want to move forward. I think there are some practical fiscal realities that we have to deal with. As those change, we will be as nimble as we can. We want to make sure we continue to engage with members of the public, especially in the area of the dog park. Many community members have been involved in those discussions. We want to deliver, and so those discussions will continue.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you. Not having internet connection issues, but having little tiny people around me issues. So if you hear weird sounds, that's what it is. Thank you for the response about the park still being a priority for not only the reasons that Council President Hunt mentioned, but also when we have what I would term, I would think are some of the most least comprehensive planning that you need to do, I would think, and low cost, such as a dog park. I appreciate that the mayor's office wants to try to get something done, even on a temporary basis. We're going to have to be able to do things like that. We can't just put everything on hold. And if you can't do things like that, then move forward with some things that are not super complex, then I would be concerned that we have bigger issues. So on another topic, I wanted to say that I am much more aligned with Council President Hunt and Council Member Martz on the budget and performance measures. But I want to, I have a question. I'll express it a different way than being opposed or supportive to Council Member Walsh's comments, and that is, I would assume that the mayor's office and the Director Goldberg, as you're thinking about the budget process this year, that assumed in this process is that the community is going to want to be very involved, and in particular, with the issues about police department funding. So I don't see this as an either or, like we can only do one and not the other. But I would like Administrator Rodkowitz or Director Goldberg to speak to that, because I can't imagine that you're going into budget season thinking that we can do one and not the other. It's just I think we all assume, and rightly so, that we're going to have a lot of feedback and input about, community policing in particular, and that we're just going to have to figure out a way to fit it in without giving up something else. I agree with Councilmember Marks. We just have to move forward. I don't know that I agree or not with spending our money wisely, but we certainly can do a way better job if we do what we said we were going to do. We just can't put it off another year. So I would like to know if you are assuming that kind of engagement is going to happen and be part of our budget. I think the last I heard from the mayor's office about this is that the mayor's office is trying to figure out ways that we can, my phrase, be different with some of the funding in the police department and how we do some things. So I'm assuming that that's part of this. Anyway, that was a long-winded question.
So Councilmember DiMichele, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
Councilmember Goodman's absolutely correct. We are facing a lot of different challenges as we sit here in June of 2020 that we didn't expect several months ago. The council next Monday on June 15th will hear from the administration on a whole variety of issues dealing with racial justice, police department staffing, police department procedures, and those discussions will continue through the budget process. And I think looking at the police department's budget, how best to align the monies that we spend on law enforcement in Issaquah with community standards is going to be a piece that will also run parallel to all of the discussions you've heard this evening. The other piece, quite frankly, is the COVID-19 response, that there is still quite a bit of work to be done there. Your next item on the agenda this evening begins that discussion, but there's additional talk for that. We are looking at having a special city council meeting here in the next week or 10 days to continue that discussion. So those are two parallel tracks, and really the third parallel track are the city services assessment issues. So some of them are further along than others. But again, the council made it very clear at the end of the last budget process that you wanted us to continue to work to align how we are spending our dollars to community standards. So those are three separate paths in addition to the traditional path that we've described this evening. All of that will come together in the August-September timeframe for the proposed budget that Mayor Pauly will present to the City Council at the end of September.
Thank you. Before I weigh in, I want to ask if there are any more comments from the council. All right, I'm not seeing any, so I will add my 2 cents here. I want to, first of all, say that I agree with Councilmember Walsh regarding the calendar schedule, that September 2nd date is a little problematical when it comes to coinciding with the opening of schools. So other than that, the calendar looks good to me, with the caveat that I agree with all the comments regarding having a broader conversation with our community and focusing in on whether or not our budget does reflect our community values. And I think that's going to be a very deep and deep conversation, and one that we really need to be thoughtful about, and we need to take the time to have that conversation both with our community and with the council, just among the council members, as we work towards some solutions. If that requires extra meetings, none of us knew that any of this was going to happen when we ran for office, but I think all of us have a good idea of what we're getting into when we take on the role of a city council member, and so that may involve more meetings, and I would welcome that as we try to sort out some of the issues and the impacts of recent events. So I am there. I also agree with the comments regarding the need to move forward with performance metrics. I support that as well. So those are my comments. And now I'm seeing that there are other council members who want to comment, and so I'm sorry for taking my chair's prerogative. So Councilmember Hall, go ahead with your comments.
No worries at all. This is Zach Hall. Thank you very much. Just for the sake of to help provide direction, I agree. I think the calendar looks good. I think having additional dates for backup is good. I liked where Councilmember Walsh's head was out at earlier with regard to community engagement and trying to think of ways that aren't just asking people to come to us on two occasions, and maybe thinking of one that just came to mind is we could record that first meeting, and then I've always thought it would be nice to engage more with neighborhood HOAs. Maybe we could forward that out to HOAs and try and get opinion that way, but I'm sure that smarter heads could come up with some better, more engaging ideas with regard to community engagement that doesn't just ask people to come to a public place, because I think people are going to be a little timid to do that for a little while, rightfully so. And then we started talking about the dog park, so I was looking at the capital projects lists again, and this might not be the appropriate format, so if it's not, City Administrator Bobkowitz, please tell me to shut up, and we could just chat about it offline another time. But the non-motorized improvements for Northwest Sammamish Road is a priority of mine, and so I'm curious, we're really not expecting any delays in that work. I had questions about if there were delays from WashDOT in that work, and also what community engagement is looking like that for right now. So, because I grew up in that community, and I can tell you that many people think very different things about what's going on with Northwest Sammamish Road, that they might be getting more lanes, that there'll be 2 sidewalks, 1 sidewalk. So I just kind of vomited everything I was thinking, but feel free to interpret that as you will, Wally.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. On the last question, I'm looking at the screen, and I do not see Bob York, the interim Public Works Engineering Director, on the call.
Yes, I'm here, Molly.
Oh, you are? Okay, there you are, Bob. If I could phone a friend then. Bob, you heard the question from Councilmember Hall. Do you have any additional information?
Let me start with the I-90 auxiliary lane project. It is proceeding ahead as planned, and there's progress going on, as you might see when you drive down I-90. That project continues, and we have community outreach going on, both mostly by WashDOT, but also by city staff. So that project continues. Once that project's done, it enables the opportunity for improvements to Northwest Sammamish Road. I guess the big question is how the budget shapes up for continuing on with the city feature that we are looking forward to. But the I-90 project needs to be completed before we talk about the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized improvements, because the I-90 project is allowing right away for the non-motorized improvements. So far so good, but the big question remains: can we have budget to do the next step on the Northwest Sammamish Road project? Thank you.
Councilmember Hall, did that at least provide some additional information for you?
It certainly did. And then just a quick follow-up, if that's okay, because it's marked as green as an on track. So am I to interpret Mr. York's remarks to mean, it's marked as green right now, but it very well could have major challenges in the future? And I guess if that's the case, are there, maybe that's for every project, but are there any other projects that are on track now but could likely have minor or major challenges? This is a broader question that I suppose doesn't have to be answered right now.
every capital project is subject to that. I think one of the things that I've heard from I think all members of the council is to have more up-to-date information about projects. So as status changes, you'll have that information. So our hope is to provide this report that you have this evening in front of you, revised, every 45, 60 days, so that you'll have the latest. And so that if you do see a change in an updated report, you'll be able to ask us questions, or we can share it as we present it. So after this evening, our plan then is on August 11th to come back and have a very similar discussion to what we're having this evening, have the budget documents, have the CIP, the work plan documents on, so that you'll have the latest updates on the full array of capital projects.
Excellent.
All right, City Administrator Bobkowitz, you had a question, and I have a question for you. Have you received the feedback from the council that you need at this point? Or are there other things you would like us to discuss before we move on?
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. The only question for the group then is that question of late August, early September outreach. Is there a rule of thumb or a time frame that you feel more comfortable with? Again, we've avoided that late August time frame because of more traditional vacation patterns. Certainly we'll have the information that we will have by that August 11th meeting with you all. So we'll be prepared after August 11th. Is it your advice to us to do something more in late August versus waiting to that early part of September? Or are we just need to be as creative and as nimble as we can, given all the various factors?
Are there any comments from the council? Council President Hunt.
Thank you for the question. This is Council President Hunt. I wonder if there's an option for having a online survey or a more informal way to gather some preliminary input from people that are interested in participating in the budget in August, and then maybe push the first engagement actually a week later or a bit later, so it's not coinciding right with the start of school. I guess that would be one suggestion. That's off the top of my head though.
Right, thank you. We could easily do that.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Ray.
I'd like to build on that, and I'd actually challenge the administration to come back to us with some detailed thinking about what the community engagement would look like, what the different tools would look like. Could we do some stuff online? Could we do some stuff in person? And what the time frame would that you would suggest. So something where we've got something where we have a little better sense of what it is you're thinking about doing with the community engagement, something really new for us, exciting, but new.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council, we can do that. We can probably come back in about 30 days, perhaps at one of your study sessions at the end of July, middle of July, to have that information.
And if I can add to the discussion, the school district has been running something called a thought exchange, and I have not participated in that, so I don't know exactly how it works. But my understanding is they've had well over 1,000 people engaged in that dialogue online. I'm wondering if we could find out how that works and if that might be a process for taking extended comments. As I understand it, it involves people putting in their comments and then reading other people's comments and then commenting again. So it's an interactive process. So just something to think about, explore, and see if possibly we could do a similar thing to engage our community. All right, are there any other comments from council members that I may have missed? All right, seeing none, I'm going to move on to ID 0698, Business Recovery Plan, and the presentation will be from Wally again and Jen Davis-Hayes, our Economic Development Manager.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Let me just make some initial comments before I turn it over to Jen. We have been working diligently over the last several weeks to develop a recovery plan, business recovery plan, based on the discussions we've had with the council, the discussions we've had with the mayor's recovery task force, the discussions we've had with our vision partners. So our hope is this week to not only have a discussion with the council, but also the recovery task force. And on Friday morning, we are having a meeting of stakeholder business owners from our various vision partner organizations. So it is our hope that we will be able to roll out the plan that we're going to describe this evening to all of those various groups over the next several days. So with that, Jen Davis-Hayes, our Economic Development Manager, is on, and I will let her move forward with the presentation. Jen?
Thank you, City Administrator Bobkowitz. Tisha, can you please do the next slide? Thank you, council members, for being here tonight to talk about our business recovery plan. As Wally mentioned, we have been working with our partners and with others to develop this plan, and we're here tonight to solicit any feedback or guidance. And then we have some specific direct economic assistance to business items that we'd like to get some direction for whether or not to proceed. So we look forward to the discussion tonight. You'll also hear from some of our Vision Partners members, Kathy McCory from the Chamber, Terry Thorne from the Downtown Issaquah Association, Beth Javins from Visit Issaquah, and Christy Garar from Issaquah Highlands Council will also be available. So next slide, please. We all are aware of the need for our business recovery plan. We have, for the past several months, been in a response mode, and really probably every day our partners and myself have been getting anywhere from 5 to 24 contacts from businesses. That's in addition to what we do to reach out to businesses to learn about and hear about their concerns. So they have shared with us many challenges they face with reopening. And so this, as we all know, will not be a simple effort. The limited occupancy may cause some not to do that during the phased reopening because it does not make financial sense. They worry about their employees' health, their customers' health, and the unknown level of return to customers. So we, again, have put together this plan to help address some of those issues. Next step, or next slide, please. So overall, there are 4 elements that we'll be talking about. So business assistance and services, regulatory relief, which is really something that city can do, our promotion and messaging, and measurement and reporting. I'll move on to the next slide. Our first element we're going to be talking about is business assistance and services. I've asked Kathy McCory from our chamber to speak about our collective efforts around this important element.
Thank you, Jen. And I want to just personally thank you for your leadership on our weekly vision group calls. It's been an amazing group, and I have found it extremely beneficial. So also asking Jen, if I miss anything in this, to please jump in and make sure we cover everything we're supposed to. So each of these bullet points I'll address one by one. Outreach and direct communication with businesses. Some of the things we are working on and will continue to do so are our weekly calls, broken down by sector or subject, depending on the hot issues of the moment. All of our organizations have been making weekly calls to businesses. We have been conducting surveys. Regardless of what organization they come from, if we find them valuable information, we do the surveys. Weekly newsletters are coming out from the city, the mayor, the chamber, economic development, plus regular outreach from DIA, Visit Issaquah, and Issaquah Highlands Council, doing our best to keep businesses informed. Roundtables, special meetings scheduled from all the vision partners have happened and will continue to happen. A new project we're excited to be working on was the suggestion from the city to start finding those success stories to share with other businesses to give them hope and words of encouragement and best practices. Also, we look forward to promoting the city's Shop Local campaign that we'll be hearing more about this evening as well. As far as in-depth professional business assistance, I want to start with, again, the Vision Leaders Group helping us create the toolkit. I used it myself this week. I used it for signs. I used it for policy. Economic development and the Vision Leaders did a great job putting together a very useful tool. We've been holding and will continue to hold weekly webinars for businesses. And again, it depends the hot topic of the day. Whatever the business's questions and concerns are at the moment, those are the speakers we're looking for. The job fair, we're looking at whether, how we're moving forward with that, which we will. A sublease list, which became a recent topic of conversation. The stakeholder meeting that Wally referred to this Friday. Jobs page as to who's hiring, and that's on both the city and the chamber site. The business summit is still moving forward in the fall. Restaurants, the outdoor expansion and retail will be a great addition to help those businesses recover. And programs that create interest and activities around business and community. So whether they be events or marketing campaigns that will get people back into those businesses and supporting our local economy. With workforce assistance, we have tremendous partners. We're partnering with the state, with King County, with multiple departments within the city. Emerging Leaders is creating a mentorship program. We're working with AWB, the Retail Association, Greater Seattle Partners, the Port Authority, SCORE, SBA, Startup or Restart 425, our East Side partners, which include other cities and chambers, including Bellevue and Redmond. And lastly, use of park space. We've had some discussion around the great use of our park space for our business community. It would provide opportunities for our gyms, our yoga studios, music studios, dance studios to all use our parks to get back to work, utilizing that outdoor space. It might also be a valuable asset for team building and even staff meetings. And Jen, I'll just throw in personal comment. With our office, we can open at 25%, which means we can have 2 people at a time in our office. And so we're still going to be using Zoom meetings for quite a while. We discussed today, we would love to rent some space and just be able to get together with social distancing and have a staff meeting in a park one nice sunny day this summer. And that's all I have, Jen, if I hit it all, I hope.
Oh, probably so. So, yes, thank you, Kathy. As you can imagine, as you've heard, there's a lot going on in this category. I think the one thing I would just like to mention is in the council packet, we did provide some data from our business advisor service that is provided through Startup 425. And so I'll just pause now for any questions or comments, or would you prefer me to move forward?
Are there any comments from the council? Jen, I am not seeing any, so go ahead.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. So here's where we will have, hopefully, we were requesting some direct feedback about some direct economic assistance programs we're looking at. So we'll first talk about the business grant program. You've heard about some of that earlier from Chamber President Kathy McCory, and you also have received some letters from businesses, I understand. We'll also talk about direct support to Village Theater and lodging tax distribution. Next slide, please. So one of the ideas that has been proposed is to do a business grant program with our CARES funding. Several other programs at the state, some private companies have offered small business grants, many offering up to $10,000. We, as a city, have not explored this. And too much in depth yet. So what we're doing today is to talk about if there's a desire to spend, to partially spend some of the CARES money that is coming from the state and county on direct grants to small businesses. One of the things as we move forward to think about is the number of businesses we have and making sure that the grant amount is impactful to businesses. As we are requesting direction and input, think about what criteria are important to you as council members. So is it something that the size of businesses, the type that's more important? Are they allowed to remain partially open if they received other resources from SBA? Those are some of the things that we want to consider. I did present an alternative option here that would actually require less administrative actions on the city, but also be able to be across the board more fair, because knowing that we cannot provide grant assistance to every single business possible. And so that is, again, we did not do any analysis yet, but we can analyze the impact of setting a limit for businesses who make more than a certain amount, to not require them to pay B&O taxes. Currently, our system does not require any business who makes $100,000 or less to pay any B&O tax locally. And then you may recall that in action earlier this year that we deferred the payments for the first quarter B&O tax from April to July. So those two things are currently there. And so I will, again, if we are looking for direction, and can come back with further details at our next meeting.
I do have questions from the council. Let me see here. Councilmember Hall, I believe you're the first one.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Zach Hall. Thank you very much, Jen and Kathy, for that detailed presentation and for all the information in the agenda packet. Certainly appreciated reading that. I've been pretty impressed with what they're doing in the Snoqualmie Valley, North Bend and Snoqualmie, and I'd be curious, I know that they're doing this kind of direct grant program. Kathy, if you're plugged in with Kelly Coughlin, or Jen, if you know of what's going on in North Bend or Snoqualmie, what kinds of criteria they're using, I would be really interested in that. If you know that, that's great. If not, then that'll just be for comments later.
Kathy, do you want to comment on that? I don't have that at my fingertips, so I don't want to comment.
And I don't know fully. I'm happy to get more information, but they did come up with some qualifying questions. It is for very small businesses. There's a cap on the number of employees. There is a question about whether they have received alternate funding. And it is a joint effort by the chamber and the cities, since there's multiple cities involved. I think Kelly is kind of being a liaison and structuring North Bend and Snoqualmie to look and feel very much the same. So there's fairness in those two communities.
And I guess I would say that the city, did participate in the review and recommendations for the state's small business grant program. So that basically businesses applied to the state of Washington. Those applications were forwarded to our King County organization and then distributed to cities to review based on the basic criteria, but we were also looked at some things. We set our own some criteria around, were businesses forced to close? Again, this is very early in the process. Were they forced to close the time and remain closed? Where they, I think it's the size. They did have a question about the size of business and how impactful the grant would be. So asking what are the resources they had. So we can definitely build upon that. It is challenging, as Kathy was one of the members of the Vision Partners, as we looked at the criteria, and you still end up with many businesses that are very deserving of a grant, but we're not able to provide that to as many as we'd hope we could do that. So.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. So just trying to take a step back here. So what we're talking about is the 1 million, 1.1, 1.2, I can't remember what amount that we have received as a city as a part of the CARES Act funding that went to either the state or King County and then got passed on to our city. So I'm wondering what requirements we have on spending that money. Are we required to give it to small businesses? Are there limitations on when we have to just give that money? Can we use the money ourselves for certain areas? Like what are our guidelines?
City Manager Bobkowitz.
Yes, Councilmember Walsh, members of the council. The guidelines come from the federal government. Again, this is money that was received by the state of Washington, which they have passed through to cities. It's about $1.1 million, and it can only be spent on expenses that have been incurred because of the COVID-19 crisis. So that is a very, very broad definition. One of the reasons we're talking about this evening, and we'll bring this back to a special council meeting in the next week or 10 days, is to talk about more broadly, how would the council like to spend that money? Many communities, as has been described here, have used at least a portion of it for small business grants. Others have used it for other economic development issues, have used it for rental assistance, have used it to support other nonprofits and human service agencies. We also believe that expenses that we have incurred are eligible for reimbursement. So portions of this money could be used to deal with our deficit situation. So it's a policy question for the council, and this is one component part of it, and we look forward to your feedback this evening, but we also plan to come back to the council at a special meeting in a week or 10 days to have that broader discussion, to get direction so that we'll know how you would like to see that money, the CARES money allocated moving forward.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Goodman, I believe you're next.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman here. Councilmember Hall had just about the same question I did. First of all, what are other communities doing in terms of figuring out what the grant conditions would be? Because it seems like this would be an opportunity to learn what others are doing, and rather than invent the wheel or reinvent it. And I wouldn't just limit it to East King County. The entire country is dealing with some of these issues, and so I would look far and wide. And I think we should be creative. It's more helpful to me if the question comes along with suggestions of what we could do and where the information comes from and reasoning behind why. So just saying, limiting the number of employees, or whether they've received other funding or whatever it is, it can all sound very good, but what's the reasoning behind it? So in order for me to help make an informed decision, I would need that kind of information. I would also like to know when Administrator Bobkowitz mentioned expenses, expenses, depending on the context, is very defined. So in terms of the IRS, it's a very limited definition. So I think it's important for us to know what kinds of quote unquote expenses we can use it for. If other communities are using it for grant or rental assistance, all the things that Administrator Bobkowitz mentioned, then maybe that's okay. But I think we need to know, the council needs more information about specifically what we can use it for, and what the parameters are of that, not just whether we can use it for business. I have been interested in making sure that we provide help to the business community, and I know all council members have as well. But I think we need to know what the parameters are for this money, not just not just that. So I look forward to the other questions and comments in the rest of the presentation. Those are the comments that I have so far and questions. Thank you.
All right, and Council President Hunt, you're next.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I also think that it would be helpful to have an idea of what we want to achieve with the program ahead of time. And so one thing I was thinking about is, it was mentioned earlier that sharing success stories and sharing how different businesses are overcoming challenges right now could be a really valuable, And so I wondered if you know of programs, business support programs or business grant programs that are currently supporting innovation or gathering information about how businesses are potentially partnering or innovating in ways that allow them to overcome some of the challenges right now, and if there are programs like that, and then if that's something that's under consideration here. So something like a business capacity grant, but you could also get information that could be shared with other businesses.
That's a great question. So the grants that have been for small businesses, again, in our area so far have been through the Washington State, and then I believe the Kirkland Chamber partnered to do some grants. And those are, again, were immediately focused on immediate needs, helping to pay rent, helping to pay, much needed expenses. And so, but we can look nationwide. Definitely there are grants that are available or programs available to help businesses be innovative. And I like that concept, thinking about how we can utilize information or help businesses to learn from other businesses that way. I think a lot of businesses are still in the survival mode. Their rent may have been deferred. Their PPP may be running out. And so we have to kind of balance that without as we move forward. So but I love that idea and the comments from Councilmember Goodman and Walsh and Hall. I think the most important thing tonight is to hear what you're interested in doing, and we will learning more about, and we will come back with that information. So we didn't want to go too far down the path.
Thank you. Councilmember Martz, you're next.
Thank you, Councilmember DeMichelle. This is Councilmember Martz. Two things that when this comes back, I'd like us to consider is, one is the cost of overhead. Some options have a higher operational cost in terms of staff to support and evaluation and all that kind of stuff. The ideal program would have a very low overhead cost, like the way that we piggybacked off of other programs when providing utility assistance earlier this year, as an example of minimizing overhead. And the second is, to the extent that it's legal, I would like to see if we can emphasize local businesses. I'm not particularly interested in seeing McDonald's or Starbucks. They're going to be just fine without us. So these are the two things that I'm particularly interested in. Thank you.
Right. Are there any other questions? I do have a question, but are there any other questions from the council before I go ahead? All right, I want to focus on the $10,000. And I understand the thinking that we don't want to give an amount of money that doesn't really make a difference. But that amount of money would certainly eat up the money we have available very quickly and only serve a few companies or businesses. So Kathy or Jen, can you talk about what went into the thinking on that 10,000? And also, is there some way that we could get more nuanced about that number? Or because as you say in your presentation, we have some trade-offs that we need to look at. We've got human services needs as well. And so can you talk a little bit about how that number might be thought through and maybe made a little bit more nuanced than just $10,000 per business?
Sure. Yes. And so that is simply stating that other programs have offered up to $10,000 and businesses were able to ask for less. When we reviewed our applications for Issaquah businesses who applied for the Washington State small business grant, most asked for $10,000. So we could cap it at 5. We could say a range between 3 and 6. Because yes, even $1,000, and I don't anticipate all 3,500 businesses that are non-home based applying, but even that is $3.5 million, right? And I think, again, having where you begin to look at the size of businesses. So, there's basically just over 400 businesses that are over 10 employees. So we, focus on smaller businesses and talk about limits of dollar amounts. That's again very doable. But I think being upfront with that. So I think what a lot of businesses have been disappointed about is hearing from SBA and others that you could receive $10,000 for a grant from their emergency injury disaster loan program, and then many learned later that it was $1,000 per employee. So when they had thought they were going to receive 10 and they only got 1, that's, I think, a bigger disappointment to businesses. So we would be very clear up front what we plan to do, and again, providing some flexibility and maybe a range in that.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions? Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. Can you go over the information you said about the B&O tax payments? I think you said there is currently a threshold, so this would be setting a higher threshold, or would this be based on if a business had been making more and then is now below the threshold? Like, how would this be implemented, I guess?
Sure. And again, it's an idea. So currently our B&O tax rules do not require businesses who make $100,000 or less a year pay B&O taxes. So that helps the really small businesses. What we could do is look at increasing that threshold. So again, did not do any analysis yet, but we can look at those numbers and see what would be meaningful. Again, looking at helping the really small businesses, and similar to what Councilmember Martz mentioned, there is a process that we already do, so we could simply piggyback on to the B&O tax process and be able to provide to all businesses at a certain level of revenue a waiver of those fees. Again, I would need to look into what makes sense. We don't want to obviously impact our revenues too greatly, but that'd be another way to distribute direct payments, quote unquote, in a different way to businesses, small businesses especially.
So do I understand correctly then, if a business had been making more than $100,000 on average in the past, but then this year, because it's a particularly challenging year, was below that, then they would already, under our current rules, not have to pay B&O tax. Is that right?
Correct. And I think, so basically businesses file quarterly, so that would be $25,000. So again, the first quarter they could have made over 25, but then this quarter they may not. So, but annualized, that looks at $100,000. And I'm answering as I'm not a B&O tax administrator, but that's the basics that I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. As someone who does pay B&O tax, my perspective on that is I like the idea that it is less overhead for us as a city, but B&O tax is structured such that as your revenue goes down, your tax goes down. And so I see that as an area where businesses are already benefiting in some way from lower revenues. So they're already seeing that benefit there. I think I could see increasing that as just a quick way. I think I would, I could see increasing the B&O tax threshold as a quick way to reach some of those smaller businesses, though it does not take into account the number of employees, which is another area that I think is particularly useful, trying to help businesses maintain their employees. But then the other part that I would be interested in understanding is the revenue side of that. And so I think from my perspective, then I'm slightly against that idea, but I think there's a lot of questions there that we would need to answer.
Are there any other comments or questions about this item before we move on to the next slide? I am not seeing any. Jen, do you want to move forward?
Yes, ma'am. So the next slide. And I'm actually going to pass this off to City Administrator Bobkowitz to talk about the next two items.
Thank you, Jen. Certainly, we look at the lodging tax as being a funding source that has some fund balance in it, is not receiving revenue significantly at this point because of the closure of hotels at this point. And so we want to look at alternate uses for the lodging tax revenue. One issue may be to help the Village Theater. I know you are all familiar with the Village Theater and the economic engine that it is in the downtown, and I think it would be appropriate for us to consider a separate financial package to support the Village Theater, which could be paid for a number of different ways. I think certainly the lodging tax is a natural for that, as is the Arts Fund. We also could look at CARES dollars for that. So I would like to propose that we pursue that further. And if the council is interested in pursuing that further, to ask both the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee and the Arts Board to convene soon to talk about that. But then looking at the lodging tax more broadly to see what we can do to potentially rebate some of the fund balance back to the hotels, and perhaps look at ways to rebate future revenues back to the hotels. So they are a critical part of the economy, a critical part of our reopening process, and your staff feels that there are some opportunities to leverage the lodging tax in order to do that. Councilmember DiMichele, looks like there's some questions.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Walsh has a question.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. Isn't the lodging tax, don't they have their own budget that funds Visit Issaquah? So I'm uncertain how this would affect Visit Issaquah and other ways that fund was already being used.
And I think that would be, Councilmember Walsh, members of the council, that would be a question for the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee to look at. There is a fund balance in the fund, so I think there are some revenues that are not allocated that could be used. But I think that yes, looking at the future of Visit Issaquah, I think discussing how best to use future lodging tax dollars given the crisis that we're in, and clearly the lodging industry will be several years coming out. I think that it's important to begin those discussions.
Councilmember Ray.
Just to clarify, it was my understanding that the lodging tax had to be used on things that drove overnight stays. So you're thinking that we can build the case that support of the Village Theater will drive overnight stays in town?
Councilmember Ray, members of the council, yes. And in talking with the Village Theater, they receive lodging tax dollars from other jurisdictions. Okay. And so I think it is worth a more careful look. Also, when the Washington legislature comes back into session over the next few months, I know from seeing communications from the Association of Washington Cities that there are many communities that are looking for additional flexibility on using lodging tax dollars. Again, we may not have all the answers at this point, but I think over the next several months, there's lots of issues that will be playing out, and wanted to raise the issue this evening just to get a general temperature of the council. Our recommendation is we move forward with additional discussions, and we're looking for feedback.
Yeah, and this is more of a comment than a question. I'm completely supportive of supporting the Village Theater with LTAC, and I would encourage you to see if there are other businesses in town that are also would qualify. But after that, I have some concern about the notion of doing rebates to our hoteliers with the LTAC, because those are additional taxes that are collected from their patrons. They aren't really their money, and so that one's a little bit harder for me to wrap my brain around how you could do that without getting a little bit sideways. So a little more explanation would be needed for me on that one.
Are there any other questions or comments? I would like to say that I would very much support giving some direct aid to the Village Theater, not only because it would make sense economically, but I think it makes sense culturally as well. The Village Theater is a jewel of our community, and I'm sure as we move into recovery, we figure out how we're all going to get back into public spaces and do that safely. The Village Theater could be a center for and a place where people begin to explore that. I think it is a great place for us to be putting financial support. It attracts people from outside our community and brings people here who otherwise, who will then, utilize restaurants and so forth. The Village Theater has been an economic engine in our community for a long time and a cultural engine. So I would support this strongly. All right, now I am seeing that there are other people who have comments and questions. Let's see, Council President Hunt, back to you.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I appreciate that the LTAC committee and that the Arts Committee will be looking at this. The Arts Committee has in the past looked at grants for our various arts organizations that we have in town and arts-based businesses, and I do think that's a very important part of our Front Street and of our identity. And I also think that I've been in conversations with community members about Village Theater, and I think that Village Theater is also unique in that its business model is they will need to potentially have changes in the way that they're doing business, and they're in a uniquely difficult position, I think, because their business model is that there are many people at a theater. So with the pandemic, that's very challenging, and I want to support them. So I think that this is appropriate, and again, I think that having the LTAC look at this would be very good, and I think having the Arts Commission as well look at this and how we can support our other arts-based community organizations during this time would be very good.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. As chair of the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee and hearing the feedback from the council, I'll be working with Wally to put together a meeting of that committee very soon. And we will consider all of these issues and the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. I want us to be a little bit careful about calling out a specific business or experience in the area as something that we would want to fund as deserving more than others. That puts me in an uncomfortable place. While yes, they've been in the community for a long time, and yes, as an economic impact, I think the same thing could be said about a lot of businesses. And so I'm just a little bit concerned about us putting our perspective on one particular business over others and bringing that mindset into LTAC rather than letting them take it from their own perspective.
Thank you. Are there any more comments or questions on this item? City Administrator Bobkowitz, do you have what you need from the discussion?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
I think Council President Hunt has a comment. Councilmember.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I had a follow-up to Councilmember Walsh's comments because I think that I felt very similarly and have before talked very similarly to Councilmember Walsh's comment just now. So I think for me, one thing that would be important is for our Arts Commission to look at our Arts and our Lodging Tax Committee to look at this and look at if there are other, Issaquah treasures that are also in need and that would also fit the intended use of the lodging tax dollars or the arts dollars. So I think we have these committees and we have the Arts Commission to look at that sort of question in depth. So I wanted to address Councilmember Walsh's comment because I largely understand it and I've thought very similarly. And then I think thinking more about our particular circumstance this time, I think having the commission and the committee look at this makes sense to me.
Thank you. My apologies for not seeing your need to comment. Any further on this item? All right, can we move on to the next? There we go, thank you.
Yes, so thank you. So the next point we're going to talk about is regulatory relief. We are working on an ordinance right now to provide regulatory relief for the permitting process for outdoor seating and temporary signages for businesses. We'll bring that information back. It probably will be not at the 15th, like we said in the council packet, because agendas have changed, but in the next 7 to 10 days. We're working on creating a quick review over the counter permit that ensures that access and other public safety items are addressed, but we eliminate the fees and make sure that businesses were able to respond quickly to the needs of their changing business operations. Again, lots of businesses need to do business differently, and we want to help and not be in the way to allow them to do that. And then with the signage, again, some of the things we're looking at are to formalize the enforcement efforts that we have reduced to make sure that the public safety and the access issues do not exist for having a signage, but also the permitting aspect of that. The more exciting thing around our regulatory relief that we're looking at is the closure of Front Street and helping, again, for businesses to do business operations a little differently. And so I'm going to pass it over to Terry Thorne from Downtown Issaquah Association to provide a little bit more details about what we're doing.
Hello, I am Terry Thorne, the Interim Executive Director for the Downtown Issaquah Association. And I thank you, Jen, and the council members, and to each of you on this meeting for all that you are doing for our city during this time of crisis. And I thank you for allowing me to speak to the ideas around closing Front Street. As you know, I represent DIA, and that is an organization that is made up almost all of volunteers who are residents and merchants in our district. So we know each other pretty well. And when the task force asked the vision partners for recommendations as to how to reinvigorate our economy, it was easy for us to go out and have those face-to-face, one-on-one conversations with our merchants. A large part of our old town charm and cultural draw is our restaurants. So we went and spoke to each one of our restaurant owners and we asked them, what do you need? And they were all very concerned about their drop in revenue as a result of the limited seating capacity. So we went to work brainstorming and we were coming up with solutions. And Jen has spoken to the regulatory relief regarding signage and sidewalk use, et cetera. But I just want to talk a little bit more about the closing of Front Street and also Festival Street. As I was having one of the conversations with one of our restaurateurs, at the end of the conversation, he said, oh, and by the way, I used to live in a town, across the country, and they used to close the main street and allow the restaurants to have their seating outside in the street. And I think that would work really well for us on Front Street. And I was like, yes, that sounds really great. And he, went on to say that it would allow them to extend their seating, bringing their revenue up, and it would also allow them to honor the social distancing requirements. And so that resonated with me. And also when I talked to the other restaurateurs, they were really happy to hear of this thought. We brought it back to our board. They've already considered this in the past. And so they were definitely wanting to support this endeavor. And then we brought it to our committee members, and they were, you could just kind of like see the smiles through the telephone lines as we had our meetings. And it was really just reassuring to hear the joy in their voices during this trying time in our community. So we brought it to the Recovery Task Force, and they embraced the idea. And now we are working with the city to plan the temporary changing of use for Front Street and Festival Street that would close the roads and open up a pedestrian traffic area, which would allow the restaurants to bring their tables out onto the street. And they would have barriers, which would define each restaurant's area, which they would be in charge of. And it would just create a really cool fresh air dining experience. You know, we do have really good communication with our restaurants, and we, in fact, we have a merchant meeting tomorrow. We will be creating a guideline with the city, kind of like a checkoff list for them to do so that they are in abiding by the rules that are being set. And so thank you very much, Kathy, for pointing that out. It has been a tremendous support for us to be able to work with the vision partners, and they have kind of guided me along the way. I'm sort of new to this, so I appreciate that. But we
Uh-oh, we lost your audio.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there we go.
There, am I back?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I do appreciate the Vision Partner support while I am new to this role, and they have definitely helped us. And one of the things that we have on our guideline checklist for our restaurants is to make sure that they are checking in with the Board of Liquor to have an alteration to their permits. So the DIA leadership, our phones are sort of going crazy with text messages about all of the people talking in our community about this, and they really want it to happen. They are very excited about it. And we truly believe that when people are seeing people safely having fun in our community, in the heart of our city, that it will inspire consumer confidence. That will benefit the rest of the businesses in our district as well as the city, our galleries, salons, service businesses that we have in our district. And so we want to close by pointing out that this is really an example of a grassroots effort to help Issaquah recover.
Thank you, Terry. We have some comments and questions. And for either Terry or Jen, Councilmember Goodman, you're up.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. Well, first of all, I share Terry's enthusiasm and Kathy's enthusiasm. I think this is really exciting. I'm really excited to see the ordinance and the creativity, the streamlining regarding permits and all of that. I don't necessarily need answers now, but I'm curious about accommodations for non-Front Street, non-DIA areas, and what restaurant seating options for restaurants in other areas, how we might be, what their needs might be, and how we might be able to accommodate them, and also making sure that we do any kind of the streamlining for permits, extend that to whoever might need it. Then my last comment is that, you know, the city's often criticized for our really onerous process and as being unnecessary and expensive in a lot of ways. And so if we, I'm hoping that with the experience that we have here, with the what will be the proposed closing of limited closing of Front Street and the streamlining, that maybe we can learn some things and implement some things permanently that will help businesses. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe Councilmember Hall is next.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Zach Hall. I just have a few questions. I'll save all my comments about the presentation for the end for that last slide that says direction. But my first question was about signs and really what consequences you think there would be to just lifting all permitting for signs for a period of time. And whether or not that's crazy or that's doable. And then second is just kind of a fun question that I think is for City Administrator Bob Quicks. But would it be useful at all, or would we be able to study how traffic reacts to closing down Front Street, pass through commuters? I would be really interested in that data. Maybe that's something that I-90 collects as they're going east towards Snoqualmie, or maybe or SR 900 collects that kind of data. So I'd be curious in that too. So those are just my questions.
Okay, I'll answer your question, or at least respond a bit to your question about lifting all permitting. So we're looking at temporary signage, so like the A-frames you see there, and other signage that businesses will put up. And I think we are working with our Development Services Director Keith Niven and with our City Attorney about the sign rules that have gone through the Supreme Court about 5 years ago to make sure that we don't cause any unintended consequences. But overall, I think we want to get out of the way, make it easy for businesses. And if we end up having 50 signs per block, reserve the right to come back and say, okay, this is not the intent. This is causing visual clutter. This is causing public safety concerns, and address it that way. So overall, businesses want, again, not to go through the process to basically put up signs to say, here's where you can park in order to pick up your curbside to go order, et cetera. And then regarding from Councilmember Goodman's question about accommodations for other non-Front Street businesses, we have offered that, and our partners have actually, Kathy from the Chamber has talked to shopping center owners. Most of our other restaurants are within shopping centers that are privately owned, and so we've talked about that, and we've offered for Mall Street or other streets, if there are any businesses that are interested in doing something like this, whether it's for restaurants or others. So if we get an interest, we will definitely explore that as well. And I'll let Wally, if he has anything more to add about or to say about the traffic response. I know that I'm not sure how much of an impact, because it is, we're in a little different traffic time, but it will be interesting to see how impactful Newport or maybe some other routes are for Front Street.
Yes, Councilmember Hall, members of the council, given the limited nature of this, I'm not sure how much we'll be able to glean, but I think certainly we'll keep an eye on it. I think we've all have seen emails in recent days from businesses, from area residents, willing to take the chance to see what this is going to do, what kind of new traffic patterns might be created. I think everyone in the community just wants to pull together and help. And so we'll watch things, and if we need to make some more careful measurements of things as this goes on, we will.
I think that Councilmember Walsh is next, and if I am incorrect, please let me know.
You are correct. Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. This is Councilmember Walsh. Several comments and questions about this. Uncertain where you're planning to route the traffic, and I think I would be interested to know what the direction would be there. Also, second, Councilmember Edmund's idea about non-Front Street businesses and whether or not we are encouraging them to be able to use parking areas for outdoor seating. Similarly, whether or not we are encouraging retail to be able to use outdoor areas, not just restaurants, because retail hasn't had the opportunity these many months to have takeout as much. And then on the idea of seating, whether or not we have any, I don't know whether the chamber has any outdoor seating that they have from Salmon Days, or whether they have a partnership that they might be able to help, because I would imagine many of these restaurants don't have seating that is necessarily movable to the outdoors. So that would be another question. And then also just making sure that we are looking at Spokane and some of the other cities in the state that have already done this in past ordinances, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, since they have already put stuff out that we could be able to use and copy. Thank you.
Great questions, Councilmember Walsh. So we have a very informed, Stephen Padua, who works in the PWE, is working on the details of the traffic, the details of the logistics of routing traffic with our traffic engineers. So I don't have the exact details of where the traffic would go, but in general, it would, the closure of Front Street is going to happen about Dogwood, and so they would be able to go along Dogwood to Newport. And we are not closing Sunset like when that happens during Salmon Days. So there are some ways to route around Front Street in the smaller closure. So, but there will be all the required traffic routes noted. And yeah, so the permit with the regulatory relief on outdoor seating is available to any other business that wants to do it throughout the city. So that will not just be about Front Street. This closure for Front Street is a separate process we're doing, but as far as what we'll bring forward to you about the permitting relief will be for any business that wants to do outdoor seating or outdoor business activities like having sidewalk retail space. And so in downtown as well, if somebody wants to pull out some information, some products to sell, if somebody wants to sit and have services outside, they are absolutely available to do that, as long as they're following the social distancing rules, and we'll be watching that. And I'll just answer for Kathy real quick about the seating. She has offered, there are some, they do have some tables from Salmon Days, but so far what we've heard from businesses is because they are not going to be using a lot of tables inside, they are going to move them out, or they have tables that they can use. But we have thought about in the future using some of the Salmon Day tables or other rental tables to create like a food court area. So right now, I think, again, we're piloting this. This is a lot of details to move forward on this, but as we move through the phases and we're allowed to gather more, I think then that we'll start looking at adding some elements. Again, we don't want to promote this as an event or as a festival, because that's, not to bring together a lot of people, but as an opportunity to expand business operations. So we'll definitely, as the phases move on, we'll look at adding some things that can benefit other folks. And I appreciate you sending the information about Spokane. We also are looking at Bothell, which is closing their main street for, actually, it's a much shorter block area, but they're closing at, I won't say temporarily permanently, so not just a few nights, but to allow businesses to continue to do this. So we looked at that ordinance as well, and I think others, it's really helpful to be able to not reinvent the wheel.
Great. Councilmember Martz?
Thank you, Councilmember DeMichelle. I'm going to have 3 questions going forward. We do Salmon Days when it's generally pretty dry, although, so in terms of awnings and other ways to keep dry, if it's raining out, how this would work in terms of if the weather wasn't perfect, I kind of want to understand. The second is around enforcement, and then back to the cost of overhead, and whether we know what the cost would incur to the city in additional efforts for enforcement. And then finally, the third issue is I'm just really concerned about traffic. I remember a few years ago, I once tried to get through town. I had a council land and shore committee meeting back when we had things, and it's an hour and 15 minutes to get from home. And I'm just concerned for all the folks who live in May Valley and that live on the backside of Squaw Mountain, and whether they'd be able to get through town. So I just want to, these are all issues I want to understand. This wonderful idea. Just want to understand these going. Thanks.
Great questions, Councilmember Mart. So, yeah, the issue of weather is a concern. So we have some businesses who have tents. We, the city or DIA, does not have awnings or other things to provide at this point. And so I think we're again looking at trying this as a pilot, seeing what we can grow with that. But we are working with making sure that as we look at the permit or the requirements that we want to make sure public safety and such are looked at is how we can utilize tents if needed. So that is a good question. As far as enforcement and the costs and overhead, we will bring that information to you. I don't have all the costs right now, but we are relying heavily on DIA and volunteers. So actually, if anybody's interested in helping with this event, I mean, there's some setup things, there's businesses, but the actual space that the businesses will occupy are going to be the responsibility to set up and break down of the businesses. So we are kind of spreading the work that's required on this. But you're right, there will be some additional costs and for the city as well. And then traffic. Again, we'll look at making sure that not only are the detour signs correct, but that we do plenty of community notice as possible on our reader boards and other places to inform people. So before it's too late, they're down at the block, then they can maybe go to Sunset and get around it much quicker. So since we plan on doing this Friday and Saturday nights over the next several weeks, not just once. We hope that we'll learn and people will also learn traffic patterns, but we again know that this is a new thing and we are open to making adjustments as we move along.
All right, Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. You may have already taken this into consideration, but I didn't hear anything about it. We've had concern from residents in the past about blocking sidewalks for access for people that are using wheelchairs. I think this would also apply to people with strollers or other things, but people that want to have the sidewalk for walking. So I think that it's important that there be access for that, for people to safely go along the sidewalk or safely go along a different corridor if people are being rerouted. And then also, I was also thinking about the parking spaces for van accessible parking to make sure that people that do need to be parking closer to the businesses to get access have that ability now that we're potentially reducing the parking that's directly on Front Street.
That's great. And so we definitely, as a municipality, we also worry and care about making sure that our residents have access. So making sure that sidewalks aren't blocked. So that's, again, the ability to move out into the street will ensure that sidewalk passage is allowed, but there's also going to be a pedestrian path in the center. And as far as parking, I know that DIA's worked a lot with the businesses. So I will be honest that not every business is going to, there are some businesses who are going to say, wait, my customer can't pull up in front anymore and come right into my business. But we do know that there are parking spaces on the backside of many businesses. And so we'll be working again to work with the businesses to communicate that, to make sure we can do signage that's helpful to direct people to alternate parking spots. And so again, DIA is on the ground and talking to businesses every moment and every detail about this. So I don't know if there's anything else, Terry, you'd like to add on that topic.
I would like to add that also I think there will be parking available at the library because they will not be opening to the public for a while. And we definitely have signage in mind to direct for parking, and we are speaking one-on-one with our merchants about their concerns and making sure that everybody is happy and that we take all things into consideration. But we do think that it'll be a big boost of business for our merchants on the street, and so they're happy about that.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Ray, and my apologies for not using your title earlier tonight.
You're fired.
Your turn.
Hi, this is Chris Ray. A couple of comments and maybe a question. One is, what are we doing around public safety and making sure that Eastside Fire and Rescue has access, since that's a major thoroughfare? Because if we block the street, how are they going to route around it? So that's a question for you to dig into. As Councilmember Marks pointed out, I'm concerned about traffic patterns and what traffic we're going to start to push off into the surrounding neighborhoods, and also what parking are we going to start to push off into the surrounding neighborhoods. So I love the idea. I think it is just really a really neat idea, but I think we just need to be aware of what gets pushed when we do this and where it gets pushed and the impact it'll have on those that are surrounding it.
Jen, do you want to reply?
Sure. So actually tomorrow, Stephen is doing a walkthrough with our fire inspector from Eastside Fire and Rescue. We've been working really closely with them about making sure there's a 20-foot wide path for their trucks, and making sure that, so they're walking through to kind of look at and walk through what that may look like, because it may be a meandering path where there's more restaurants on one side of a block than the other. So definitely addressing that. And again, from a municipality aspect, when we go through a permitting process, which we're officially doing a special events permit for this, those are the things that are looked at. Police and fire provide input about access and that type of thing. And then, so we'll make sure that we do what we can to monitor and adjust for any impacts regarding traffic patterns and parking. And so we can also look at pay attention to how many spots are being currently used in the back parking lots and other things like that, and report back to you how things go, because no doubt that we will have some learning that will happen, but we want to make sure that this is a benefit for as many people as possible.
Thank you. City Administrator Bobkowitz has a comment.
Yes, just that it is 8:52, and we had had a goal of 2 hours for the meeting this evening, and we're approaching 2.5. And so, Jen, if you and our vision partners could just be mindful of that. I know we have a few more issues we wanted to cover, and so Councilmember DiMichele, if you're all right, members of the council, we'll go through those final few issues, and then we'll be able to wrap it up for the evening.
Sounds good.
Okay, next slide, please. And again, we will be back to talk about a lot more of these topics. So going through the promotion and messaging, so we will be back to provide more information about the buy local marketing campaign we're working on. As our city administrator, Bobkowitz, mentioned, we will be talking more about this with the Recovery Task Force and our business leadership forum and in our next council meeting. But we're very excited to work on a logo that can be shared by all of our vision partners and their marketing. We're talking about banners, we're talking about some paid posts. And so again, really focusing on buy local and promoting the businesses that are currently open and continue to open as the phases continue. With that, our What's Open Eastside map is live. And so originally we had a Eastside restaurant map that we worked with our partnering cities with. This one is expanded to any business that's open. So businesses, if you're not on this map, go there, Google What's Open Eastside and enter your business information. You can adjust as you adjust your business operations. And we're very excited to use this not only now during the transition, the phases, but ongoing, that will help support our buy local efforts. We talked about promoting positive business stories. And so we know there's a lot of good things happening out there from our business owners and from their customers supporting businesses. So we know that we're going to try to do more of that and make sure that we learn those from our partners as well. And then our broader community messaging, this was talked about last time, about how can we inform our residents about the safe way to shop, about the information that helps them to further support their favorite businesses. So we're gonna do more of that with our partners. And also there's some messaging that's happening around the East Side cities about talking about during recovery and talking about the strength of our East Side and our Issaquah community, about the partnerships and the diverse mix of Fortune 500 and mom and pop businesses. So some of the messaging you'll hear from in Issaquah, you may be seeing also in Kirkland and Redmond. And so again, having this cohesive message as people begin to feel like, yes, East Side is the place to do business and a safe way to do business and recover. Next slide. And it wouldn't be, and so we're going to go through all this, but we want to make sure that we measure and report back to you. So we will be putting together an economic recovery dashboard to follow information such as the taxes and the occupancy and the economic health of some indicators there. And we'll be providing that to you on a monthly basis. And then we'll also get back to our economic development update reports that we did. And so that's more of a narrative opportunity for us to talk about the recovery initiatives, providing business updates, so closures, new businesses coming, and talk about any trends, because we have no doubt that this recovery is not going to be, we're not going to know what to expect during this recovery. So that will be an opportunity on a monthly basis to provide our stakeholders, including council, what's going on in the community, in the business community. There are some other data that's happening. Kathy from the chamber mentioned Intel, local Intel, which is a data service that the chamber is going to be moving forward with. We, the city, are also supporting that with part of our port grant money. And then one other great tool that Visit Issaquah is going to be using in the recovery. And so if Beth from Visit Issaquah is still on the line, she can talk a little bit about the data tool that they'll be using moving forward during the recovery.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you to the council. I am Beth Javins. I'm the executive director with Visit Issaquah, as you know, and I've been asked to briefly discuss our role in impacting our local economy as we move through the phases. Just want to thank the team. We are here to amplify your messaging, and we're eager to collaborate with you and with the city and share our data-driven, results-oriented destination plan going forward for the remainder of 2020. Also, you know that we do apply for and receive lodging tax, and we did provide the LTAC. What we expect is the forecast for the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee through specific reports that we receive on where our occupancy began at the beginning of the year and where we are now and what the forecast will be. We can provide that information to you in a separate presentation. I think the best way that we as a destination marketing organization, as I've mentioned, is to help you is to put visitors in stores, put people in seats, and put heads in beds. And while visitor traffic is down for some businesses, about 30 to 50% due to COVID, we have a very powerful new proprietary tool. It's an analytics tool that I have in individual meetings with the council have talked about, and we have deployed it this week. And we're going to use it, and when it's used in conjunction with paid social media, with user-generated content, with mobile advertising, with email marketing, search engine optimization, and search engine marketing, that helps us identify and attract our visitors to the area who historically come here to recreate, but they may not spend money while they're here. And so you're probably wondering how we know this, and Councilmember Goodman got a preview of that platform this morning with a meeting I had. We obtained 2 years of GPS and credit card data as proprietary information that is opt-in for the consumer. It's backdated to February of 2018, and we geofence the entire community and the top points of interest in the community, including Tiger, Lake Sammamish State Park, Grand Ridge Plaza, Gilman Village, downtown, and we wanted to determine what the strongest economic drivers were going to be for the community over the last 2 years. So to give you an example, in 2018, we had over 500,000 unique visitors traveling through Issaquah, and those are not commuters. We have stripped out anybody who was traveling who would have been within a 50-mile radius of Issaquah. And The stats are only counted once a day. So it's a very specific tool that we use for GPS. So of the 500,000 visitors that came through the community, about 60% of them, so you guys can probably do the math better than I can at this point, but they were here specifically for recreation. So that's the Alps, Cougar Mountain Regional, that's like Sammamish State Park, and Duthie. And about 2/3 of those did not spend any money at all in our community. That's the estimate based on the credit card issuer that we use, which represents about 30% of the market. So we think that this is a really important opportunity for us to package the destination, to tie all of our points of interest together. It's a huge missed opportunity, or it's a great opportunity for us to promote, but to not have people spending money locally when they're driving right through our town to get to those areas of recreation. And we want to be the one leading that effort. So the tying the message and all the assets together, we can do that with effective and powerful messaging, with unique storytelling, and a call to action. It's a very nimble, very traceable and trackable up to the minute marketing plan that we have. And so soon we're going to be advertising Issaquah as destination recreation. We'll have window clings in every window for our restaurants and our retail, supporting those businesses and giving them a way to tie back to our social media so we can continue to promote their stories and the stories of our partners here on the call. We're also doing the marketing campaign will extend through 2020. So the themes are going to be active outdoor. We're going to have demonstrated physical distancing with specific graphics and photography so that we're obeying all of our mandates. And then other themes would be casual recreation, strolling, and then also because Issaquah is one of the 15 cities on the Mountains to Sound Greenway Heritage Area, we are going to be working with the state on a program. We've already talked with Mountains to Sound Greenway Heritage Area and REI, the REI Coalition, on Recreate Responsibly and trying to implement some messaging somewhere throughout the city to work with them. So our market is in-state and out-of-state, and we're going to be looking for experience-seeking travelers and visiting friends and relatives. Those are the two outdoor national parks, outdoor, and visiting friends and relatives are the biggest markets right now. Our hotels are primarily corporate, Monday through Thursday, but because of the business community and COVID, everything is going towards a leisure market. So by geofencing our retail, our recreation, our hospitality, our arts, and our hotels, in the community, we're really defining our uniquely Issaquah assets, and we're going to advertise them with our dynamic content. And we're going to start with 5 counties and cities within the state, and also 5 states and counties and cities within those counties that are out of state that we've identified. And that will help us determine the visitor profile and also how much spending would accompany that. So I think in closing, it's just we have another powerful tool that we can use. And we can also help individual businesses with this as well and showcase them. So any restaurant or shop with a call to action that we can highlight, we can put that in the messaging as well to help them. So if they have coupons, discounts, or anything else they want to promote, we can do that. And then finally, we know that this is a very evolving time and that we want our message to be sensitive, and we do appreciate very much the opportunity to promote the community citywide. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. Jen, do you have comments to close?
Yeah, so actually I was going to chime in next steps, our next slide, which actually, as we look at the next steps, we're really focused on the next few weeks. So we're going to develop and implement our marketing campaign in the next few weeks. The June 15th meeting is actually going to be the special council meeting that's being scheduled right now, so that we'll have the regulatory relief in front of you to discuss and potentially approve. And then we're looking to close Front Street as early as the weekend of June 19th. So I really appreciate your comments and questions, and we'll end it there.
Thank you so much. Are there any more questions before we begin final comments on this item? Any more questions for Jen? So I think I forgot to ask Council President Hunt if we had received any emails or other correspondence on this particular agenda item. Sorry.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt, and we did receive several emails supportive of the idea of small business grants specifically, and the need for those small business grants right now. We received some emails about the challenges right now that businesses are facing, financial impacts from COVID, and then also delays in permitting. And then we also received an email about the outdoor seating and sort of creative ways that businesses might comply with the social distancing guidelines, as was discussed earlier this evening. And that's a summary of the correspondence we received.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments, wrap-up comments from the council for the administration or to help the process forward? I am seeing none. Is that correct? Everybody? Oh, Council President Hunt.
I did have some comments. I think that I appreciate that the city is being nimble in piloting this outdoor Front Street idea. I think that we've heard a call from the community to try to be nimble and to try new ways to support our businesses, to keep them, to give them an opportunity to stay afloat during this extremely challenging time. So I appreciate the quick action on that and the wanting to pilot and try something and learn from that and then go forward. I am interested in the lodging tax discussion, the allocation of lodging tax funding for Village Theater. Village Theater is number 5 on the treasurer's list for Issaquah. So the treasurer's list is a list that the city council and mayor passed a resolution in the early 90s saying, you know, these were super important things to the community. They're the treasures of Issaquah, and that's one of them. And I really think it is a treasure, and so it's also in a uniquely challenging position right now. And it sounds like it's also potentially eligible for this lodging tax funds. So I would like that to be further explored. And I do think it's important that that we support those treasures of this community. And then also on the business, I do not think at this time I'm supportive of the B&O tax threshold increase, but I am supportive of using funding for small business grants. I'm not sure how much, and we didn't discuss that this evening. So that's a big question, how much we want to put forward for small business grants. But I do think we should, I am interested in considering that. And as I said before, I'm particularly interested in sort of combining a few of our goals here. So one goal is that we want to support businesses by sharing success stories, and we want to support businesses by providing them with messaging and access to platforms that we can share resources. And so if we can tie that into our grants, if we can request information in terms of how businesses are changing their business model or using new innovative partnerships, et cetera, and then also sharing that back to the business community, I think that would be excellent.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Councilmember DeMichelle. This is Zach Hall. I just wanted to say with regard to Village Theater, completely agree. It is certainly a treasure in our community. I played in the pit orchestra for about 3 or 4 years for a few summers there. Really love it. But I agree with Councilmember Walsh. I think that we should, and if I misremembered who brought this up earlier, please poke me. Sorry about that. But I think it would be better to think about supporting Village Theater through how are we supporting the entire arts community instead of just calling out one business, one treasure within our community. And I mean, frankly, I don't see how you think about supporting financially the arts community in our city and not have Village Theater rise pretty much to the top of the list. So I'm supportive of the idea of having the Arts Commission think more broadly about how can we support arts in Issaquah during this time. I'm also supportive of using some CARES Act funding for small business assistance, but I would like to see, if this is possible, I would like to see kind of a breakdown of here are some suggested, like here's the pie of CARES Act funding, here's some suggested ways that we can spend it if we did business assistance and more rental assistance, maybe assistance for organizations who are supporting food assistance efforts in the Issaquah area. Then I think the other option would be, use it to cover existing expenses that have already incurred. So maybe it would be a good idea to kind of put together some scenarios of options to come to council, so that way we can kind of see an image of what it looks like without trying to grasp it from thin air. Just some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Is there anyone else before I give my wrap-up comments? All right, I'm not seeing any others, but please, if you think of something you want to say, please do. Personally, I would like to very much to support the small business grants, but I would like to see a much more detailed plan. And I know from the conversation, it sounds like you've been struggling with the amount that we would grant and we would grant that and how we would do that in an equitable way. So all of those things I think would be very important issues to resolve when you come back and ask us about that. Yeah, I think it's a tough thing because I'm also feeling that we are going to have to look seriously at what we're doing in the realm of human services. I was in conversation with a waitress who had gone back to work this last weekend. Yeah, it's going to be at least 2 weeks, maybe a month before she gets a paycheck for that. And people will be leaving unemployment, and there's going to be that lag period between going back to work and getting money coming in. And during that period, we're going to have to think about food distribution. We're going to have to think about rental assistance again. So the clearer that you can be on the small business grants and how much exactly the money you're requesting, that would help me come to a decision. On the sign ordinance, I totally, and I've heard a lot of enthusiasm in the community about the idea of closing down Front Street. I happen to live on Front Street, and so I too was worried a little bit about the traffic. I have to say that in the last couple of weeks, we are now starting to see that backup on Front Street that we used to experience, which we haven't seen for 2.5 months now. So it is coming back, and so we need to think about whether we're directing them down Newport Way toward Front Street or through town. But I think there needs to be a really clear traffic plan for that, so we don't have a lot of frustrated people who are, not planning to stop and enjoy the outdoor dining. And then I want to say, commend you. The June 19th date sounds like a very aggressive date. I mean, we're just a little ways away from that. So congratulations to you for taking on something that is an enormous task and trying to get it done by June the 19th. So, and those are my comments. Now that I've had that chance, is there anybody else who would like to speak? City Administrator Bobkowitz, have we answered all the questions that you have? Do you need any other feedback from us?
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele, members of the council. I appreciate the time you spent on this. Our plan is to come back at a special city council meeting, as you know, the June 15th meeting where we had previously planned to discuss this. The mayor has asked that we move the issues of police and racial social justice issues, and so that will be on the 15th. We've been polling the council for a date for a meeting. I do not believe a date that week will work for folks, so I think we are looking now at that following Monday, the 22nd, with a previously scheduled study session the next day on the 23rd. We've not confirmed that, but I think that's the direction that we're going in. So our intent would be to bring back some decision points. There's some ordinances that Ms. Davis Hayes has mentioned that would all come back at a special meeting looking like the 22nd of June at this point. But thank you for the time this evening.
Thank you. And not seeing any other council members who want to comment, I am adjourning the meeting at 9:14 p.m. Thank you, everybody.